Parliament's Standing Committee on Public Accounts, or SCOPA, says reported plans by business rescue practitioners to terminate the employment of SAA's entire workforce are a manifestation of years of financial crisis. The state-owned airline has offered severance deals to all staff from the end of April after business practitioners failed to persuade government to provide that further R10 billion bailout. SAA has relied on bailouts and state-guaranteed debt agreements for years, but has continually failed to turn the airline's finances around. Now, last November, SCOPA said it was concerned about SAA's behaviour when the airline failed to submit its financials to Parliament for 2 consecutive years. Joining us now, we have SCOPA chairperson, Mkhuleko Hlengwa. He joins us via Skype. Great to have you. Thanks so much for joining us.
An absolute pleasure, Leanne. Good morning to you and the viewers.
How do we allow this to happen to a national carrier, an airline collapsing, and we can't blame it entirely on coronavirus? This is years in the making.
Well, coronavirus really added fuel to the fire. It is unfortunate that it's the workers in the main who are going to bear the brutal brunt of the collapses of SAA after repeated warnings and after every effort had really been made to make sure that SAA is reined in. We are dealing here with a situation whereby good governance took the back burner. You are dealing here with a situation where there was an over-reliance on bailouts, where they were actually normalized as a source of plugging the hole. But the problem has continuously been that these bailouts have been made in a vacuum of, restructuring, and actually without having any due regard for setting into motion sustainable plans of treating SAA as a business, purely as a business. You mentioned the issue of the financial statements, and of course that does put us in a predicament, because we are not in a position to fully scrutinize the state of financial health of SAA. But of course, it's clear that a refusal to submit, and by SAA's own admission, was amongst other things because they were not a going concern. And so we now find ourselves, where the crisis has come full circle, because the bailouts which have been relied upon are no longer available. The business practitioners wanted 10 billion rands recently, after actually being given 3.5 billion rands by DBSA. And so the issue is fundamentally that the funding model for SAA was not sustainable if it was just in a context wherein bailouts were the only source of financial funding. The issue for us, Leanne, is you can't throw financial solutions to non-financial problems. You can't just want money and not do the right things that come with money. Those things mean you turning your business around. It means cutting routes. It means rationalizing routes. And it also did mean, Leanne, that they had to have looked at the staff establishment a long time ago to make sure that they manage their wage bill in a manner which was consistent with how the business was doing. And all those things have not been done. And of course, corruption. Mismanagement at SAA has become something which was normalized. And all these things, despite repeated warnings. And of course, when you talk to people and they don't listen, you're bound to have this problem. So it's very unfortunate that this is what has actually become the result of all those years of mismanagement.
Yeah, I mean, there is a long list, as you've given it to us so clearly, as to why SAA is in the situation it's in. So let's just ask you bluntly, is SCOPA in agreement with SAA offering basically severance packages to all staff from the end of April, given the failed attempts at yet another government bailout?
Well, we'll be very cautious to be in agreement, because we are not in a position, and this is the tragedy, oversight and accountability has been held to ransom here. We're not in a position to scrutinize fully what the state of health of SAA is. All we are relying upon is the piecemeal information which has been given to us. So we are, of course, whilst we are dealing with this coronavirus, Parliament has set into motion virtual meetings, and once we are good to go, SAA will be at the top of our agenda so that we can actually be in a position to make an informed decision of whether we're in agreement or not. But moreover, this is something which the Portfolio Committee on Public Enterprises will have to deal with. But as a principle, we are in agreement with the non-granting of the bailout, simply because, as I'm saying, we can't be throwing financial solutions to non-financial problems. And also the taxpayer is expecting us to agree to bailouts or to support bailouts, having had the benefit of full scrutiny of what is at play. And in the absence of that, we run the risk of aiding and abetting the culture of non-accountability. And that is why for the longest of time, we were saying to SAA, look, give us your financials so we are in a position to be able to make informed decisions. And so we've been really handicapped by that. But at the same time, we also put our foot down to say any further discussion with SAA is dependent on those financials. But of course, we've been now overtaken by events. And so we will be setting into motion the work of SAA along those lines of oversight once the virtual meetings have set into motion at Parliament.
So we see now the unions, of course, are not in agreement with the termination of the staff. I mean, the two unions, particularly the biggest unions, NAMSA and SACA, they're refusing. I mean, we're talking approximately 5,000 employees. They've got their lawyers looking into the offer and everything that's been put on the table. They're apparently meeting Minister Pravin Gordhan today. I mean, what could possibly come out of this if government is not prepared to and does not really have the money to give SAA and to give the airline? We're talking 10 billion rand, that bailout that has been refused. Where can they go from here?
It's very, very difficult to determine where they can go, because you'll recall, Leanne, that the business practitioners themselves were supposed to have concluded their work on the 6th of March, and they applied for an extension. And that application for an extension was an indication of the depth of the problems that they were in, and of course an indication of them wanting to buy time. The fundamental issue is that for SAA to have survived or hope to survive is that they have to restructure. So that whatever funding model comes out of that is consistent with the new SAA. That is what needs to happen. SAA in its current form is not viable, it's not sustainable. There are too many shortcomings. So the job cuts are inevitable, really, whether it's the 4,700 or a percentage of them. But what is clear is that the tragedy is that job cuts will become a feature of whatever direction that SAA will take. And of course, any lender is going to be fully interested to understand the extent of the financial health. And quite frankly, it's not a good one. And the fact that government itself is not giving the bailout is going to be of concern to potential lenders, because most of the time SAA has been relying on guarantees. So the picture is not good, whatever way you look at it. And obviously SAA and the business practitioners specifically will need to be imaginative and innovative about, one, the restructuring, but secondly about the funding model. But it must not be lost on us that we are here going to have to grapple with job cuts, and that's the unfortunate part. But all of this is a culmination, really, of hard-headedness and a failure to listen and a failure to subject the entity to oversight and accountability so that all the arms of the state can be able to play their role. And the SAA fundamentally here is to blame.
Yeah, Mkhuleko, let's look at the severance package, because we talk about this offer of a severance package, but the airline cannot even afford to pay the severance package because they, don't have the money, and it is completely dependent on the sale of assets. I mean, we're talking to the sale of property, aircraft parts, and its trade debts. And there's no guarantee that this will happen. So even the severance package is something that's completely up in the air. The other details of the severance package, including 1 week's pay for every year of service, a month's salary, payment for outstanding leave, and a 13th check of an employee is entitled, if an employee is entitled to one. So this is all if the property is sold. So there's no guarantee of this severance package either.
That's what happens, Leon, when you don't do things right. The ending is never good for anyone, and the casualty in the main will always be the workers. And that is why we were, concerned about the direction of SAA, and that's why. Therefore, the meeting one with the minister, who's the shareholder representative, is very important. But most importantly, the plan which the minister is to table to cabinet, because that is what is going to give us a direction or an outlook in terms of where SAA wants to go, so that we can clarify the ifs and provide a level of certainty. And so this fundamentally now remains an executive decision by cabinet that they need to take. All we will now do is ensure that whatever direction is taken is consistent, one, with, of course, the law, and ensure that the collective interests of workers are protected as much as possible. But of course, there are going to be trade-offs, and there are going to be opportunity costs to the decisions that are going to be taken. And I stress again that had the right things been done, workers would not be confronting the kind of situation we're in. And I think that hindsight being the best side, the unions themselves will have to assess their own role insofar as how things have played out at SAA, because I think it cannot be right that the unions come in only at the tail end to complain. Where have the unions been when things were going south all these years? So they will also need to be accountable to their members, so that we are able to fully assess and diagnose the problem, how the problem has manifested. So there does need to be a level of accountability as well on the part of the unions.
Yeah. Let's, Mkhuleko, I'm just going to throw a couple of questions at you.
Sure.
We need to get as much as we can before the news at 7. So some have seen this as a drastic move by the business practitioners, and others, such as Business Unity SA or BUSA, say that they support the move. What is SCOPA's reaction with regard to how the business practitioners have handled the whole saga at SAA?
Leanne, let me be very blunt. We have not had the opportunity to interact with the business practitioners. As I'm saying, we were awaiting their report on the 6th of March, and they applied for an extension. And this is where it becomes a problem. This is what we were warning against. If SAA continued on as it did on the trajectory of wanting to keep Parliament at an arm's length, but also at the same time want us to exercise oversight, they set us into a problem. So we have not had an opportunity we've seen them. We know they came to a meeting. Yes, we know who they are. We can put names, faces to names, but where an opportunity to interact and interrogate has not been provided. And that is why, therefore, the meeting I'm speaking about is of urgency, because we have to get to a level of understanding one another, but also to provide the Portfolio Committee on Public Enterprise, which is first and foremost responsible for the entity, also an opportunity to interact with the business practitioners. I think also at the heart of this is a question which most likely is not for SCOPA to venture into, but we need clarity in terms of the ideological outlook, one of the executive on this, so that we can be able to make informed decisions. Are they pro the selling off of SAA, or they want to rescue SAA? That's the decision that they need to take.
Yeah.
And having done that, then set into motion processes consistent with that decision. So I think that lapse or that absence of clarity is going to land all of us into speculation. So there is urgency as well on the executive making a determination on the direction that they want to take.
Yeah, we're hoping a lot of this comes out of a meeting today between the minister and the unions and all those involved as well. I mean, liquidation of the airline is also something people speak to, but the realization that if you go the liquidation route, it seems that the creditors will get preference as opposed to the employees. So, that's also a very difficult situation. You'd rather the employees get the money, and the creditors are the ones that unfortunately will lose out on that as well. So it is a difficult situation. 2 more questions to you, and if you don't mind answering them quite quickly. SAA is among several South African state-owned companies to have become technically insolvent. Is this the start of a massive collapse of SOEs as we know them?
If we don't do the right things as a country, and specifically the shareholder representatives of all the entities, being the various ministers of the departments, then yes, something has got to give. And that something that's got to give is quick turnaround strategies consistent with what we want to achieve. You need to deal with the issues at PRASA. You need to deal with the issues at SABC and so on and so forth. So yes, there does need to be a turnaround, and we need to use SAA as a test case so that we can be able to learn best lessons as to how to avoid a collapse of an entity. Yeah. But if we don't, then it will happen.
Yeah. And then finally, Mkhuleko, as I wrap the interview, corruption. This is a major one. You spoke about it earlier as well. You know, the loss of jobs for almost 5,000 people, not to mention those that are suppliers and extended families. And I mean, the devastation caused by this is huge. And yet we still have not seen a single person being held accountable for the treatment of SA and the rampant corruption that has existed there. This is a problem. I mean, we've seen former board members appear before the Zondo Commission. Accountability. Can any funds from this be recovered?
I fully agree with you, Leanne. And whilst we welcome the work of the Zondo Commission, the law enforcement agencies have completely failed us to follow through on the very real evidence which has been presented. And in the absence of consequence management, then obviously, these collapses happen. I think while South Africans can be worried and tired of commissions of inquiry, I would strongly suggest that there does need to be a fully fledged investigation into SAA. Whatever form it takes, I don't know. But we have to have one so that we can be able to go to the bottom of what actually happened and hold the people responsible, accountable. In the absence of that, we normalize corruption again, and corruption wins the day. So I think that a very specific and SAA-focused investigation will actually benefit the country and maybe give closure as well to the workers to understand the problem.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. Chairperson of SCOPA, Mkhuleko Hlengwa, discussing SAA's predicament as the airline plans to terminate its entire workforce by the end of April. All right, that leads us to the news.